Let's start with something strange, a palace that vanished from history. Around 1100 BC, the Mycenaean Greeks, rulers of huge stone palaces, suddenly disappeared. Their world collapsed into what historians call the Greek Dark Ages. No one knows exactly why, but it left behind a mystery. What happened to their written records? The answer is simple. They vanished too. The Mycenaeans used a script called Linear B to write things like lists of sheep and taxes. But when their palaces fell, so did that writing system. It disappeared completely until much later. After centuries without any written Greek language at all, people started using the Greek alphabet instead. Letters we still use today for words like hello or apple. That's where Heinrich Schliemann comes in. He was an archaeologist who loved Homer's stories about Troy and Greece. In the 1800s, he dug up a treasure of gold and jewels near what he thought was Homeric Troy. He called it Priam's treasure after King Priam from Homer's Iliad. But hey, race the twist. Schliemann wasn't just digging for history. He was trying to prove that Homer's epics were real. His passion made him see things others might not have. Homer's stories are famous because of a woman named Helen. According to the Iliad, she married Paris of Troy, and that's what started the Trojan War. It sounds like a simple cause and effect, but it's actually one of the most debated parts of Homer's tale. Some scholars say Helen was just a symbol for bigger conflicts, not the real reason for war. Now, let's go back in time. The Homeric poems, both the Iliad and the Odyssey, were written much later than people might think. They weren't stories from 1200 BC or even 800 BC. No, they came into being around late 8th century BC to early 7th century BC. That's long after the Bronze Age ended, and when Mycenaean palaces had already crumbled into dust. This raises a question. How did Homer write about events that happened centuries before he was even born? The answer might be oral tradition stories passed down by singers for hundreds of years. Carl Blegen, another archaeologist, studied the layers of dirt and stone at Troy's ruins. He found something surprising. Schliemann had gotten things wrong. Priam's treasure wasn't from the Homeric period Troy 6 or 7 at all. It was buried in an older layer called Troy 2, a different time altogether. But hey, race what Blegen also noticed. Some parts of Homer's Iliad might match real events. The story of the Trojan War is set around 13th century BC, and some evidence suggests there really was a war during that time. However, scholars still debate whether it matches exactly or if Homer exaggerated things for drama. Let's dig deeper into how stories changed over time. Oral tradition worked like this. A singer would tell the same tale to different people, but each telling might change slightly, like passing a story around at dinner until everyone has their own version. Over 400 years of retelling and changing, Homer probably blended real events with myths about gods and heroes. The Odyssey is another piece of this puzzle. It follows Odysseus' journey after the Trojan War. The war itself lasted 10 brutal years. It took Odysseus an extra 10 years to get back home. That makes 20 years total for one story, which seems like a long time even by today's standards. But wait, what about those Mycenaean palaces? Their collapse into the Greek Dark Ages wasn't just about kings and wars, it was also about writing. The Linear B tablets found at sites like Mycenae and Tiryns show that people wrote in an early form of Greek before Homer's time. But when their palaces fell, so did those records. No one knew what happened to them until much later. Then there's the alphabet, a big deal for writing stories down. The earliest known version of the Greek alphabet came from Phoenician traders who lived in places like modern-day Lebanon and Syria. They used symbols that looked more like pictures than letters. But they were the start of something huge, readable words on paper or stone. This happened after the Mycenaean collapse around 800 BC, which is when Homer's epics finally got written down for the first time. Now let's get to a big reveal. Troy itself wasn't just one city in history. Archaeologists have found 9 layers of ruins stacked on top of each other, from ancient Troy all the way up to modern-day Troy 9. The Homeric stories probably came from the middle layers like Troy 6 or 7, but not the ones where Schlemont's gold was buried Troy too. Another big reveal. Even though Homer wrote about a war with Greece and Troy, there's no clear proof that Greeks actually attacked Troy. Excavations of the city show signs of destruction around 12th century BC, maybe from an earthquake or attack, but we don't know for sure if it was Greek soldiers who did it. Schlemont's work is especially controversial here. He believed so strongly in Homer's stories that he saw gold and jewels as proof of the Iliad's reality. But modern archaeologists say his zeal made him misinterpret evidence. His Priam's treasure, for example, probably didn't belong to any king named Priam, just a regular treasure from an older time. So what do we know now? The ruins at Troy suggest there was some kind of conflict in the 12th century BC, maybe even one that inspired Homer later on. But the Iliad's events are likely a mix of real history and stories passed down by singers for centuries. It's not just about kings or battles. It's also about how people remembered their past, even when no one could write it down anymore. Scholars still argue over some details, like whether Homer wrote his poems in the 8th century BC or earlier. Some say oral traditions stretched back to Mycenaean times 1800 BC, long before writing existed. Others think the stories were created much later, when Greek people wanted new heroes and legends after their Dark Ages. And hey, race another twist. Blaise Pascal, a French philosopher from centuries after Homer, called the Trojan War a romance rather than history. He didn't believe it was real at all. That shows how long the debate about Homer has been going on, even before modern archaeologists started digging up Troy. But what's confirmed? The ruins of Troy show signs of destruction around 12th century BC, a time that matches some parts of the Iliad. However, there is no solid proof yet that Greeks were involved in that attack. It could have been another group nearby, or even a natural disaster like an earthquake. So what's left to solve? The biggest mystery isn't whether Troy existed. It's how much of Homer's stories are real history, and how much came from people remembering their past over hundreds of years. There is evidence of a war in the 12th century BC, though scholars remain divided on whether it involved Greeks fighting against Trojans. And what about those Mycenaean palaces? They left behind no written records, only ruins and pottery shards. That's why we still debate whether Homer was retelling true events or making up stories to inspire people with tales of glory, honor, and gods walking among humans. One thing is certain. The Homeric epics shaped how ancient Greeks saw themselves, as brave warriors who valued courage above all else. Even if their stories aren't perfectly accurate history books, they help define what it meant to be Greek for centuries after those palaces fell into dust.